All right, we're looking at Unit 5, Presentation 6, and this is the second presentation on issues. In this one, we're solely focusing on Russia. So this is the one that we did not go over in class. Now, so first off, just a couple of things to make sure you know. So first off, in the USSR, artistic expression was censored because, and you need to know why, and it's because within art, a lot of times they would criticize the government, sometimes secretly and stuff like that. And so the government controlled everything, what books could be read or written, as well as what kind of paintings could be painted, and things of that sort. So everything was under government control because you could not criticize the government at all when the Soviet Union was in power. And then you need to know, of course, what caused the pollution in and around the Aral Sea, and what effects we've seen there. And so obviously decrease in life expectancy, increases in disease, and also the Aral Sea has been shrinking because of over-irrigation. And then you also need to know Gorbachev's 1980s Soviet policy. So Gorbachev is the last leader of the Soviet Union. You can always pick him out in a photo because he has a really giant, awkward-looking birthmark on his forehead. And it looks kind of like Russia, so it's kind of funny. But Glasnost and Perestroika were his last two policies. So Glasnost is the opening up, Perestroika is restructuring. So Glasnost has to do with communicating with other countries and trying to trade. Perestroika has to do with switching from a command economy to a mixed economy. So basically bringing in elements of capitalism to the country. And then looking at this political cartoon, you see this young teenage girl coming in with new shoes and dress, and she says, "See, Grandma, capitalism has given us so many choices. Look at my new Italian shoes." And then the old grandma cooking says, "Yes, yes, but at least under Brezhnev we didn't have to eat them." And so one thing you see when capitalism takes over, when they transition to a free market economy, not everyone's happy about it. They don't really have access to necessarily to that much more than they did before, because people's needs were not being met. They weren't making the kind of money they needed to be able to buy the things they wanted. All right, and then simple one, what mountains divide Europe from Asia? And that's the Ural Mountains. So once you pass the Ural Mountains, you're in Asia. And then what's the overland trade route from the Far East to the Mediterranean? And that's the Silk Roads that connected the two together. And then 1917, the Tsar's rule in Russia was ended by, and that's the Russian Revolution, which brought about the beginning of the Soviet Union. And then also Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are known as the Baltic Republics because they're on the Baltic Sea. They used to be part of the Soviet Union. I mean, of course, you should know by now what a command economy is, and that's where the central government makes all decisions about a country's economic policies and decides what it is that they're going to do. And that's a political cartoon of Putin flexing his muscle, and you'll notice the hammer and sickle on his muscle, pretty much saying that he's a fan of the Soviet Union, bringing it back. All right, then what caused the region to divide into 15 independent republics? And of course, that's the fall of the Soviet Union, which brought about capitalism. And then the nation formed by the Communist Party in 1922 is the USSR, which stands for Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And then the political cartoon there, you see, and this is after the fall of the Soviet Union, it says, "In case of emergency, break glass," and inside you see the hammer and sickle. So the hammer and sickle was the symbol of communist Russia. The hammer represents industry, and the sickle represents agriculture, the two things needed for your economy to grow. All right, and then the name of the city established on the Baltic Sea that was built by Peter the Great. We talked about Peter the Great a little bit. He's the one that wanted to westernize Russia, and one of the ways he did that is by building the city of St. Petersburg, which he modeled after Western European cities. All right, a couple of things we're going to look at in this presentation. First one is, actually it's not in the right order, but we're going to go over regional conflict. So we'll look at 4 wars in Transcaucasia. Also the Russian economy, the issues they deal with because their enormous size and widespread criminal activity with the Russian mafia. And then economic struggles. So what are the obstacles faced in moving from a command to a market economy? It wasn't an easy transition at all. So in 1992, Russia removed all price controls because that's part of a command economy is that you control the price of all products. And so you got to release that and just let the market control it. Well, first, this isn't going to go nice and easy. Almost immediately, you see inflation go up by 250%. So think about like the price of milk. Say it's $2 a gallon. Today, you go to the store tomorrow, it's increased by 250%. And the same thing has happened for the price of all products. And that's not going to be cool at all because I guarantee you your income did not go up by 250% overnight. So you can see why it would be hard to buy anything at that moment. And then after that, Russia started selling their government-owned businesses to privatize them, so to individuals. So you start seeing the beginning of what's called privatization, which is a key term you should know. So privatization is when you take something that formerly was controlled by the government that now is in the hands of private business owners. So it's like the difference between a public school and a private school. A public school is owned by the government, ran by the government, whereas a private school is started by individuals who own it. It's not controlled by the government at all. Then, of course, obviously everything's going to be really unstable because of this. So you see an economic crash. So obviously within the first couple of years in the 90s, a lot of people in Russia would rather go back to communism. That sounds a lot better than this load of crap. So things are not really looking good for them whatsoever. And then you see some billionaires take over, and there's really 14 billionaires that kind of take over Russia and really control everything that's going on. Thank you. All right, so these guys are known as like the oligarchs that really control it. So the first one is actually the first president of Russia, Boris Yeltsin. And then another of these oligarchs, these 14 billionaires, is Vladimir Putin. You've probably heard of him. And then you also had Medvedev, or Medvedev, whatever, doesn't matter. He's rich. And he also helps control Russia. So very few people really benefited from this transition immediately. All right, so your big obstacles in dealing with the size of Russia and their economy is distance decay. So longer the distance makes communication harder, and of course transportation more difficult, more expensive, which is going to be harder to get goods everywhere throughout Russia, especially at a decent price. And then also some regional leaders, especially in eastern Russia, kind of ignore the leaders in Russia. So Putin, for example, has a hard time controlling the eastern half of Russia because people can just be like, I don't care what you say, Putin, you're dumbface. They don't have to listen to him. He's like 3,000 miles away or 4,000 miles away. So it's hard to control such a large area, which is why so many Russian leaders have been so harsh on their people. We've already kind of looked at maps like that. And then get into the informal economy. This is the mafia. So organized crime has grown quite a bit in Russia, especially with the rise of capitalism. Let me move some of these pictures so you can actually see everything. Ah, crap. Not what I want to do. Well, that worked. All right, so the Russian mafia, especially in the 90s, grows rapidly. They start getting control of a lot of the businesses and stuff throughout Russia. So when you get to the late 90s, about 40% of private companies and 60% of state-owned enterprises were controlled by the mafia. So odds are, even today, if you go to Russia and spend any money there, go to a restaurant, stay in a hotel and stuff like that, odds are some of your money is going to fund the Russian mafia. And then, of course, rewarding illegal activity over honest business. If you control that much business, and this is where the mafia, it gets really bad. If you control like an entire industry, and someone else that tries to be an honest businessman, tries to come in and open his own business, and tries to compete against businesses that are owned by the mafia, you can just imagine what's going to end up happening to that guy. Either he's going to have to be basically taken in by the mafia and start doing them favors if he wants to survive, or he's going to disappear somewhere in Siberia. And so you can't compete against them. And then, of course, when they get into the police force, if anything happens, you report to the police. Well, if the mafia is giving them money, they're not going to listen to you. They could care less. They're going to follow the money. And so you can get corruption within the police force. You also get corruption within the government because it's all about the money. So this is where something like, organized crime like the mafia becomes so dangerous. When it infiltrates all those different parts of society, then you get corruption all throughout, and then you really can't, as an honest person, start a business and really do anything without having to undermine your own morals and make some kind of deal with the mafia. All right, then population issues. So Russia is also struggling demographically speaking with their growth. Russia has a negative growth rate currently. And you can see why in the 90s when you transitioned from communism to capitalism and it's not working, you have a high inflation rate, your first thought on your mind in a family isn't going to be it's a good time to have a baby. You're going to wait until things get better. Well, things weren't good in the 80s either, so you're not going to have a baby in the 80s. Things aren't good in the 90s, you're not going to have a baby in the 90s. Things are a little bit better now, but still you're not having a lot of people that want to raise a family in Russia at this point. So you see a negative growth occurring. So that means you got an aging population. So then you got more pressure on the government to provide pensions and stuff like that for this aging population when they retire. And then, of course, taking care of them when they're older. And then their death rates, when they die, the average age of death is quite drastically different between men and women. So the average age of death for a man in Russia is 59. Compare that to about 78 in the United States. But the average age of death for a woman is 72. So the women are living a good deal longer than the men in Russia. Partly because of working conditions, obviously the wars they fought and stuff like that in the past. So men just didn't live as long. So women are living longer for sure. But you can see in their population pyramid from the year 2000 that there's no one's having kids. Like, it's just not happening. And so their population's shrinking quite a bit. And the bad thing about that is that obviously your future, your country is in the next generation. And so you need, a large generation coming in that's highly educated that can spur your country on economically. And Russia is not having that whatsoever right now. We'll skip on past that. So like I said, life expectancy is really low for men. 70% of the women are unemployed, and a lot of this is still the cultural expectation of women staying at home, and also the lack of education from women as well. But now they're starting to encourage women to work more so out of the home, but still it takes a while to change that culture. The women earn less in Russia compared to men, which is, in the U.S. that's the same thing. But then also, too, this is another reason why you'll see decline in birth rates, because when women go and work and make that more of a focus, and you'll see this in any country where women start joining the workforce more so, the birth rates start going down because women don't want to have babies because they want to keep their job and stuff like that. They don't want to take time out to have a child. We'll skip that. All right, and then, of course, standard of living has changed quite a bit before and after the Soviet breakup. I'll try moving this box real quick. Well, hold on. I'll just move this down. There we go. All right, so lifestyles. Really, there's been a lot of psychological distress on the people, losing their jobs, lack of money, things like that, and so it's hard to get them really have a positive outlook on life. And to want to, push hard to get a job and earn more and things like that. And then, of course, environmental pollution. Russia, as I've told you before, does not care about the environment. So there's pollution all over Russia, and really bad pollution. Just sick stuff, because they could care less about the environment, especially when the Soviet Union was in power. So just kind of looking at some of the effects here. Of course, in the deserts of Kazakhstan, so Central Asia, they tested over 500 nukes. They blew up 500 nuclear weapons in Central Asia for testing, and so all of that radiation that's there from that, and so you still get deaths from that and cancer. Then, of course, we talked about Chernobyl in Ukraine as well, and the lack of cleanup there. And then in northern Russia, far northern Russia, near the Arctic Circle, also a lot more testing. As well. And then, of course, more dump sites for nuclear waste. Tons of it dumped, a lot of it getting into the ocean. And then also the fact they still have thousands of nuclear weapons, and Russia doesn't even know where all of their nukes are, which is not good. And so the scary thing here is that a terrorist organization could get them. We don't know if the Russians may even sell it to a terrorist organization and therefore be able to get some kind of bomb that has nuclear capability and get it to a city here in the U.S. or into Western Europe and have a horrible terrorist attack that, in essence, is a nuclear weapon. Really that's the biggest fear, is the fact that this could end up in the hands of terrorists quite easily, and Russia may not even know that happens. And so that's the biggest fear, is a nuclear bomb coming from a terrorist. All right, now let's look at some of the wars in Transcaucasia. So war number one is Russia versus Chechnya. So Chechnya is an area called Transcaucasia, and this is the most violent area by far in all the former parts of the Soviet Union. You've got tons of different languages spoken here, well over 20, 50 different ethnic groups. So think about it, if each ethnic group had their own country, you would have 50 different countries in this one small area. And then when Stalin was in power, he tried to wipe this area totally out and kill all the Chechens and all that. So the Chechens hate the Russians. Most of the time, if you see a terrorist attack in Russia, it's usually from a Chechen, like a car bomb or something like that. They absolutely hate them. Even in the early 2000s, they took over an elementary school and killed about 20 or 30 kindergarten children, Russian children, just murdered them right there in the school in front of the teachers. Horrible, horrible situation. But they go to desperate means to get their voices heard by the Russians. And then most of the Chechens, for the most part, are Muslims. and a lot of them joined different terrorist organizations, especially early 2000s, like Al Qaeda. They've also been used for, in this area, you see a lot of drugs. So a lot of drugs being brought into Russia. So you see a lot of drug lords and things like that. They hijack things like planes, trains. Um, as I said, blowing up stuff in Moscow, a lot of car bombs, bombs in the subway system. What I was just mentioning is on here. The 300 children that were taken hostage at that school. They were killed a lot of the kids there. As far as why Russia wants control of Chechnya, like why are they going through all this crap? And it has to do with oil. That's all it is. So access to oil in the region is what's caused really all this conflict. All right, war number 2 is Russia versus Georgia, and Russia versus the Ossetians. So Russia invaded Georgia to try to really kind of unite all this area back together again, and of course to get access back to their oil. We supported the Georgians in kicking the Russians out. War number 3, Georgia versus Abkhazia. All right, so there's this place in Georgia called Abkhazia, and they've been fighting for their independence to be able to get independence from Georgia. And of course, Georgia fought to take it over to maintain control. And again, it's mainly going to be because it's a good port on the Black Sea and things like that. But relatively small war. And then you have Armenia versus Azerbaijan. And this is just over, again, a piece of land that's kind of in between the two territories called Nagorno-Karabakh. And again, it's just over the resources that are there in that particular area. And that's it.